Have you ever witnessed something so wrong, so downright cruel, that your heart started racing, your hands clenched into fists, and you wanted to just scream, "Someone do something"? Now imagine seeing it unfold, not in a movie or viral TikTok, but right in front of your eyes, in a place you visit every week, your local gas station. Picture a quiet night, a sleepy little corner store, and a clerk just trying to finish his shift in peace. And then a man storms in, angry,
Loud.
hostile, and what he says next, what he does next, it's all caught on a hidden camera. But here's the twist. What starts as a simple argument explodes into something no one expected, something that made even the police pause. And you're about to witness every second of it. This isn't just about a rude customer.
No.
This is about what happens when someone finally says, "Enough." And trust me, by the time you see how this ends, you'll be questioning everything you thought you knew about strangers, justice, and who's really watching. Now, before we go further, let me say this. You came here looking for answers. Maybe you saw the thumbnail. Maybe someone sent you this video with a message. You have to see this. Maybe you're tired of seeing good people treated badly. Or maybe you're just curious. What could possibly make a gas station clerk the center of a mystery that left thousands speechless? I promise you, by the end of this video, you'll understand exactly what happened and why this story has taken over your For You page, your YouTube feed, your Facebook timeline. It's everywhere, and for good reason. Because it speaks to something deep inside us. That sense of fairness, of dignity, of hidden heroes. So stay with me. Don't just scroll. You're already here. And this story, this true, documented, caught-on-camera story, is going to shake you. Let's talk for a second. Just you and me. You ever felt invisible at work? Like no one notices you unless you mess up? That you show up day after day, holding it all together while the world walks right past you? Gas station clerks feel that every day. They deal with rude customers, impossible hours, and more than their fair share of danger. They're there when it's late, when it's raining, when people are drunk, angry, or just plain mean. And yet, they're expected to smile, to serve, to stay calm. Now, imagine being in their shoes when someone comes in, not to pay for gas, but to unload their rage. That's what happened to Samir, a 29-year-old immigrant working the night shift at a station off Highway 75 in Texas. A quiet guy, keeps his head down, sends money back home to help his family, never looks for trouble. But one night, trouble came looking for him, and what happened was so intense, the footage had to be reviewed multiple times before the truth was clear. But here's the thing, this video isn't just about Samir. It's about all of us. Because it shows what happens when ordinary people are pushed to their breaking point. It shows how far someone will go to defend their dignity. And it shows how, sometimes, the tiniest camera in the corner can reveal the biggest truths. So, if you're thinking of clicking away, don't. Don't miss what happens next. Because the story you're about to see will not only keep you guessing, it will leave you questioning how many of these moments go unnoticed every single day. You've seen stories on the news, clerk attacked, incident at gas station, viral security footage. But this is the kind of raw, real-life confrontation that platforms like YouTube are built for. This is why hidden camera footage goes viral. This is why people hit share 1,000 times over. Now let's go back to the scene. It's 10:47 p.m. The parking lot is empty except for a blue pickup idling out front. Inside, the store is brightly lit, clean, and quiet, the hum of the drink cooler, the soft music playing over the ceiling speakers. Samir is behind the counter, stocking receipts, counting change. The door swings open. A tall man, mid-40s, white hoodie, dark jeans, stomps in. He doesn't say hi, doesn't glance at the snacks or drinks. He goes straight to the counter. His eyes?
Cold.
His voice?
Loud.
And from the moment he opens his mouth, something feels off. Not just anger. Something more. Something dangerous. You'll see it on the footage. The way Samir tries to keep calm, how his hands stay low, his voice soft. But the man keeps escalating. Words turn to shouting. Shouting turns to slurs. And then, when it seems like things couldn't get any worse, the man reaches into his jacket. That's when everything changes. That's when the camera, hidden behind a jar of peppermints, catches the move that nobody noticed until hours later. A move that would be crucial to understanding what really happened and why this isn't just some gas station story, but something that made people across the country stop and say, "He did what?" And here's where I need you. Yes, you. I want you to stay with me, because there's more to this than meets the eye. I'm going to walk you through what the camera caught, moment by moment. We'll slow it down. We'll look at the reactions, the evidence. We'll hear from the people involved. You're going to get every answer you're looking for. But only if you keep watching. Because the real twist? It doesn't come in the beginning. It comes when Samir makes a choice no one saw coming. A choice that turned this whole situation on its head. And you won't want to miss it. I know you've got other videos waiting. I know your phone just buzzed. But hold on. Give me just a few more minutes. Because what happens next, in the next few scenes, in the next few minutes, will blow your mind. And the best part? It's all real. No actors. No reenactments. Just truth. Raw, shocking, undeniable truth caught on camera. You want justice? You're about to see it. You want to know what really happened in that store? I've got the footage.
The receipts.
The follow-up. Even the response from the gas station's head office. You want to see what happens when a man thinks no one's watching but someone is? Stick around. The camera doesn't lie. And this camera saw everything. But before we roll the footage, before I show you what the man said, what Samir did, and how the truth finally came out, there's one more thing you need to know. Something that changes everything. And once you hear it, you'll never see this kind of story the same way again. What was in the man's jacket? Why did he target Samir? And who, exactly, placed the hidden camera there in the first place? Stick with me. You're about to find out. Samir hadn't always worked behind a gas station counter. Just 2 years before this night that would end up being replayed across millions of screens, he was completing his associate degree in electrical engineering at a community college just outside of Dallas. He had dreams, plans, a notebook full of circuit diagrams, and a quiet determination to one day land a stable job with a big utility company. But as life often reminds us, dreams have a way of taking a back seat when real life kicks down the door. His father back in Jordan had suffered a stroke, and with medical bills piling up and his younger sister's tuition hanging in the balance, Samir pressed pause on school and picked up the first job he could find, night clerk at a 24-hour gas station off the interstate. It wasn't glamorous, and it wasn't easy, but it was honest work, and he didn't complain. That's what made what happened that night all the more disturbing, because Samir wasn't looking for conflict. He was just trying to survive. In the days leading up to the incident, co-workers described Samir as unusually quiet, even for someone who normally kept to himself. The shift before this one, he'd left early, claiming a migraine, which was out of character. The manager, Maria, said he looked like he hadn't slept in days. There were dark circles under his eyes, and when she pressed him gently about what was going on, he shrugged it off. Just stress, he'd said. But there was something in his tone, in the way he scanned the parking lot every few minutes, that suggested something more. Then there was the phone call. Security footage, separate from the hidden camera, picked up Samir speaking quietly on his cell just an hour before the man in the hoodie entered the store. The audio wasn't clear enough to make out much, but what could be heard was this: "I told you I'm not giving it to him. I don't care what he said." That line alone would be played over and over in the investigation to follow, raising all kinds of questions. Who was he talking to? What wasn't he giving? And who was the him Samir was so adamant about standing up to? The story gets stranger when you look at the surveillance from earlier that same week. A silver SUV parked across the street on 3 separate nights, engine off, lights out, just sitting there between midnight and 1 a.m. No one ever came inside. The SUV never pulled into the lot, never bought gas. But Samir noticed. Once, the footage caught him stepping outside during one of these stakeouts, pretending to take out trash, staring hard into the darkness. He knew he was being watched. He just didn't know by who. Now, remember that the man who eventually burst through the door in a fury wasn't just angry, he was focused. Like he came in knowing who he wanted to confront. Like this wasn't a random outburst, but something personal. And that's when the questions start piling up. Was Samir hiding something? Had he gotten involved in something risky, knowingly or unknowingly? Or was this simply a case of a clerk becoming the target of someone else's misplaced rage? The people who knew Samir, his manager, his cousin who shared an apartment with him, even the older regular who came in for coffee every night at 11, none of them could piece it together. One described him as the kind of guy who'd apologize even if you stepped on his foot. Another said he once saw Samir give away a tank of gas to a stranded mom with 2 crying kids in the backseat. That didn't sound like someone involved in anything shady. And yet, the facts didn't lie. He was clearly scared. And the man who showed up that night didn't pick that gas station at random. Then there's the biggest mystery of all, the hidden camera itself. The gas station did have security cameras, but the angle that caught the most critical footage, the clearest view of what the man did behind the counter, came from a tiny device no one even knew was there. It was disguised inside a candy jar, pointed perfectly toward the register. The police didn't install it. Neither did the gas station management. When asked about it, even Samir seemed surprised. So who put it there?
And why?
That piece alone sent online theorists into a frenzy, spawning TikToks and Reddit threads filled with speculation. Some believed it was placed by a co-worker concerned for Samir's safety. Others were convinced it was installed by a private investigator, hired for reasons that had nothing to do with the gas station itself. There were even whispers, though unconfirmed, that the camera had been live streaming to a dark web forum that featured everyday surveillance for entertainment. Chilling if true. But none of these theories were ever proven. What we do know is this: the footage exists, and what it captured is as disturbing as it is revealing. As police reviewed the incident, they began to dig deeper into Samir's background. Nothing major came up: no criminal record, no known enemies, no financial red flags. But they did find something unexpected: a string of late-night payments sent from Samir's account to an unregistered Venmo username. No description, no receipts, just 3 payments over the course of 2 weeks, each exactly $147. Why that amount? Why untraceable? When asked, Samir clammed up. "It's personal," he said. But when someone's getting harassed, when someone's safety is compromised, privacy becomes a luxury investigators can't always afford to respect. And just when you think you've got a handle on the situation, another wrinkle appears. A second man, dressed in a red jacket, showed up to the station the night before the incident. He didn't buy anything, didn't speak to Samir, but he lingered by the hot dog rack, by the coffee station, even by the back exit. When asked later if Samir recognized him, Samir hesitated, then shook his head no. But the delay in his answer, just a beat too long, hinted otherwise. Was this man connected to the one in the hoodie? Was this all part of a larger scheme? Or were these just odd coincidences that happened to collide in one terrifying moment? The customers who arrived at the station that night after the confrontation said Samir looked rattled but calm, like a man who'd just survived something intense but couldn't yet believe he was still standing. He served them, took their payments, thanked them as always. But one customer, a delivery driver named Rich, said as he was walking out, he turned back and saw Samir staring into the security monitor, not blinking, like he was waiting for something else to happen. Rich later told police, he looked like he knew this wasn't over. And maybe it wasn't. Because a week after the footage went viral, another incident occurred at a gas station just 30 miles away. Same description of the suspect. Same aggressive behavior. But this time, there was no hidden camera. No footage. Just a shaken clerk and a police sketch. The man in the sketch looked eerily similar to the one from Samir's store. So now, the mystery deepens. Who was the man in the hoodie? What did he want from Samir? What was Samir hiding, if anything at all? And who placed that hidden camera just in time to capture what no one else could have seen? We're not done yet. Not even close. Because as the layers peel back, a shocking connection is about to surface. One that ties this incident to something much bigger than a single gas station. Something that goes back months, maybe even years. And it all begins with a name on a shipping receipt Samir accidentally left on the counter the night of the attack.
Stick with me.
This story is just getting started. That shipping receipt Samir left behind was almost thrown away. It was crumpled up near the register, half soaked with spilled coffee, and if not for a local detective doing a second sweep of the scene, it would have vanished into the trash. But there was something odd about it, not the name itself, but the fact that it didn't match any recent deliveries to the gas station. It was a delivery for a package marked Industrial Tools, and it was signed by someone named D. Salazar. There was just one problem. No one by that name had ever worked there. The station hadn't received any such delivery. And when detectives traced the shipping number through FedEx, the trail led to an abandoned strip mall 2 towns over. Now, that might not seem like much, but here's where things start spiraling. That strip mall had been shuttered for over 5 years, except for one unit. One unit that still had electricity. One unit that, upon closer inspection, had a wall full of monitors. Security feeds from various gas stations across the state. Not just Samir's. At this point, Samir began feeling the weight of something much larger pressing down on him. But just as he tried to explain what little he understood to the police, he found himself suddenly locked out of his own phone. All his text history, his photos, even the call log wiped. He hadn't done it, he insisted. And yet, a remote wipe had been initiated from a device logged into his Apple ID. The detective raised an eyebrow, clearly skeptical. Was Samir telling the truth, or was he hiding more than he let on? Samir pleaded that he didn't know what was happening. That's when an officer suggested something chilling. Maybe someone doesn't want you talking anymore. The very next day, Samir received a plain white envelope taped to the back door of his apartment. No return address. No name. Inside was a single sheet of paper with 2 words printed in bold black letters. Stop digging. That was it. No threats. No explanations. But the message was loud and clear. Whoever was behind this wasn't just watching, now they were making contact. Samir, already sleep-deprived and anxious, was rattled. He went to his cousin for help, the only family member he trusted in the U.S., but something about the conversation fell off. His cousin, usually calm and level-headed, seemed distant, evasive. When Samir mentioned the envelope, his cousin responded too quickly, almost as if he'd heard about it already. And when Samir pressed him, he snapped. Maybe it's better you don't know. The tension between them rose sharply, and that was when it hit Samir. Someone close to him might be involved. The betrayal wasn't confirmed, but it planted a seed of doubt that wouldn't stop growing. And that's when the last thread of normalcy started to unravel. One of the gas station's regulars, a retired cop named Hank who always came in for black coffee and scratch-off tickets, suddenly stopped showing up. A week went by.
2.
Then Samir saw it. An obituary online. Hank had died in what was ruled a hit-and-run. But the details didn't sit right. The report claimed he was out jogging, something he openly said he never did because of a bad hip. And the location of the accident was 20 miles from where he lived. When Samir brought it up to police, they brushed it off.
Coincidence, they said.
Nothing to connect it to your case. But Samir wasn't convinced. Hank had been the one person who, just days before his death, told Samir quietly over the counter, "Be careful. I've seen stuff like this before. It never ends clean." As all this chaos was unfolding, the hidden camera footage that went viral started getting taken down. One by one, reposts of the video across social media platforms were being flagged and removed, either for copyright claims or privacy violations. Even the original clip that had garnered over 4 million views suddenly disappeared without a trace. Samir reached out to the original uploader, a local teenager who had worked part-time at the station and had set up the camera himself after hearing Samir talk about feeling unsafe. But the kid never responded. Eventually, his TikTok, Instagram, and YouTube accounts all went dark. Deleted. And when someone tried to contact him in person, they were told he'd gone to stay with family out of state and wasn't taking calls. Samir was alone now, increasingly unsure who he could trust or what was real anymore. The only evidence he still had was a blurry copy of the video saved to an old USB drive, but even that seemed different than the version that originally surfaced. Some frames appeared altered, like key moments were scrubbed or replaced. At first, he thought he was imagining it. But then he realized something was missing, a crucial detail, a face that had once appeared briefly in the reflection of the glass cooler behind the register.
Gone.
As if someone didn't just want to silence him. They wanted to rewrite the entire story. Then late one night, Samir found a note under his windshield wiper. Not a threat this time. Just an address. No name. No date. But something told him it was connected to everything. He drove there, an old industrial park on the outskirts of the city. What he found inside would change everything. Because in that dimly lit building was someone he never expected to see again. Someone from his past. Someone who was supposed to be dead. And that's where the story twists into a whole new direction, one that no one saw coming. Inside that old industrial park, Samir came face to face with a ghost, or at least that's how it felt. The man standing in the shadows wasn't just someone from his past. He was the reason Samir left his hometown, the reason he'd cut ties with half of his friends, and the reason he'd spent the last 5 years trying to stay out of trouble. His name was Malik. Once a trusted friend, practically a brother, Malik had vanished after a police investigation pinned him to a credit card fraud ring that Samir barely escaped being linked to. Everyone thought Malik had either fled the country or died in a botched robbery overseas. But now here he was alive, calm, and eerily composed, as if he'd been expecting Samir all along. And the strangest part? He didn't seem surprised in the slightest to see Samir there. In fact, he acted like he'd orchestrated the entire thing. Malik didn't answer any of Samir's questions directly. Instead, he talked in circles, dropping vague references to unfinished business, powerful people, and the price of being in the wrong place at the wrong time. He said things like, "You were never supposed to see that footage, and they don't care about truth, they care about control." Samir pressed him, demanded explanations, but Malik just smiled and handed him a flash drive, one that he claimed contained the real, unedited footage from the gas station camera. "You're not the only one they've marked," Malik said before walking away into the dark corridor, leaving Samir to stare at the small, unmarked device like it was ticking. Before Samir could even begin processing what had just happened, the story took another unexpected turn. Across the city, someone else had received a message, someone who had no idea she was even connected to any of this. Her name was Layla, a nurse working the night shift at a private hospital in Queens. She wasn't family, wasn't a close friend, but she had dated Samir years ago, and although things had ended on neutral terms, they hadn't spoken since. So when she received an anonymous envelope at work with a printed still frame of the same gas station footage, the moment Samir was being harassed, but with a red circle drawn around the face of the customer, it immediately sent chills down her spine. Written in bold marker underneath were the words, "Do you really know him?" At first, Layla thought it was a prank. She even laughed it off to a coworker. But as the night went on, things started to get weird. Her car alarm went off twice without reason. Her hospital login suddenly stopped working. And when she checked her phone, she noticed a strange email sent from her address to an unknown contact at a law enforcement domain, containing personal photos and messages from her old relationship with Samir, none of which she had ever shared with anyone. That's when it hit her. Someone was targeting her, trying to rattle her, maybe even force her into turning on Samir.
But why?
She hadn't spoken to him in years. Unless whatever this was ran deeper than either of them realized. Back in his apartment, Samir loaded the flash drive Malik had given him. And what he saw made him question everything all over again. The unedited footage from the gas station wasn't just longer. It showed events that had never been released publicly. At one point, after the confrontation with the aggressive customer, a man in a blue maintenance uniform walked into the store and spoke quietly to the clerk, handing him a folded envelope before quickly exiting through the employee door. This man had never appeared in any other version of the video. When Samir paused the frame to get a better look, his stomach dropped. It was the same man who had been spotted on the security feed in the abandoned strip mall, the one watching the monitors. And worse, in one frame, you could see a badge clipped to his belt. He was a private contractor working for a security firm that had ties to federal surveillance contracts. That's when it became clear. This wasn't just some random altercation caught on camera. Someone had orchestrated it. And someone else had tried to bury it. But there was more. As Samir dug deeper, cross-referencing the timestamp on the footage with phone records, he noticed that a call had come in just minutes after the incident, an unknown number that only rang for 2 seconds. When he ran it through a reverse lookup, the source came up as a secure number from a U.S. government agency. Now, he didn't just feel like a target, he felt like bait. The gas station wasn't the beginning of the story. It was the trigger. And now, anyone remotely connected to him was being pulled into the fire, whether they knew it or not. And just as Samir was piecing all this together, his power cut out. Not just a flicker, total blackout. His phone screen froze, then went dead. Within seconds, there was a knock at the door. Not a pounding, not aggressive, just a slow, deliberate knock. He didn't move. He waited. Another knock. Then silence. When he finally opened the door, there was no one there, just a small USB drive on the doormat. He picked it up, heart racing, plugged it into his backup laptop. The file inside was a single video clip. It showed Layla, inside her hospital's break room, opening the same envelope he had just learned about. And in the reflection behind her in the glass window, that same man in the blue uniform, watching. And that's where the story splits, pulling us down 2 parallel paths, one leading back into Samir's troubled past, and the other creeping closer into Layla's unraveling present. Both haunted by secrets. Both stalked by shadows. Both one step away from uncovering a truth neither of them is fully prepared to face. But the most chilling part? The final frame of the video shows a line of text blinking across the screen. Next, it's her turn. Samir hadn't slept in over 36 hours, and it was starting to show. His hands trembled, his eyelids burned, and every sound outside his apartment made him flinch. The line between paranoia and reality was starting to blur, and for the first time since the footage surfaced, he felt like he was losing control. He tried to focus, to stay rational, to convince himself that maybe, just maybe, this was still something he could explain. But that hope vanished the moment he opened his laptop and saw the latest message. No sender. No subject line. Just a single attachment, a short audio recording labeled with Layla's name. Heart pounding, he clicked it, and what he heard froze him in place. It was her voice, shaky, panicked, talking to someone. I don't know who you are, but if you come near me again, I swear I'll call the police. I already told you I haven't spoken to Samir in years. Leave me alone. Then a pause. And another voice, much deeper, calm but cold, replying, It's not about what you know. It's about what he might tell you. There was a shuffle, a gasp, then silence. The file ended abruptly, and the screen went black for a full 5 seconds before the desktop returned, but now with a new file name blinking in red. She should have stayed quiet. Samir's chest tightened, his breath shallow. He tried calling Layla, but her phone went straight to voicemail. He checked her social media, but all her profiles were suddenly deactivated. He called her hospital, but the receptionist claimed she hadn't shown up for her shift and hadn't called in. That's when it sank in, she was gone. Not just missing, but erased. Like someone had carefully scrubbed every trace of her from the internet in less than an hour. Samir grabbed his coat and keys, bolted from the apartment, and drove straight to the hospital. The security guard at the front desk was new, someone Samir had never seen before, and he claimed there was no one by that name in their staff directory. When Samir demanded to speak to a supervisor, the man stepped back and pressed a button under the desk. Moments later, 2 plainclothes men appeared from the hallway, calm, authoritative, and far too quick to escort him out. No ID badges. No names. Just icy stares and firm grips on his arms as they walked him to the curb and told him not to come back. That night, as Samir drove aimlessly through the city, a cold truth began settling in his bones. This wasn't just about him anymore. Whoever was behind this had resources, real power, and they weren't afraid to use it. He replayed every moment of the gas station incident in his mind, trying to make sense of what could have made him a target. It wasn't just a viral video anymore. This was something much bigger, and someone had decided that Samir either knew too much or would eventually learn what he wasn't supposed to. Every time he looked in the rearview mirror, he noticed the same gray SUV a few car lengths behind. At first he thought it was a coincidence, but after 3 turns, 2 lane changes, and an unnecessary detour into a residential block, it was still there, keeping distance, but never disappearing. Panicking, Samir pulled into a gas station and cut the engine. He got out, phone in hand, pretending to scroll through messages, but secretly recording a video of the SUV as it idled across the street. He walked toward the convenience store, pretending to browse, hoping the driver would get tired of waiting. But when he returned to his car 10 minutes later, he saw it, tucked under his windshield wiper. A small white envelope. He looked around, but the SUV was gone. His hands shook as he opened it. Inside was a single photo, grainy but unmistakable. It was Layla, seated at a table in a coffee shop, looking over her shoulder with fear in her eyes. A timestamp in the bottom corner marked it just 12 hours ago. And beneath the photo, scrawled in pen, "She saw what you weren't supposed to." That night, sleep was no longer an option. Samir sat in his apartment, every light on, curtains drawn, laptop open to a document where he began recording everything he knew, every event, every person, every detail that felt important. He was documenting the story not just for himself anymore, but because part of him believed he might not get the chance to explain it later. He backed it up, encrypted it, and emailed it to a friend he hadn't spoken to in years, someone he trusted, but who wouldn't be connected closely enough to become a target. Just in case. And then came the sound. A soft click from the hallway. Not a knock this time. Not footsteps. Just a mechanical click like a key turning in a lock. Samir froze. He lived alone. No one else had keys. He crept toward the door and looked through the peephole, but it was black. As if someone was standing directly in front of it, blocking the view. He backed away slowly, grabbing a metal flashlight from the counter. The silence stretched for seconds that felt like hours. Then, from behind the door, a voice spoke, familiar but warped. It was Malik. "You should have left it alone," he said, his voice muffled but unmistakable. "They were going to let you walk away." Samir didn't respond. He didn't dare move. His mind raced. Was Malik in on it from the beginning? Was the footage a trap? And most importantly, how had they found him again so fast? When he finally opened the door, there was no one there. Just a note taped to the inside of the peephole, a note that hadn't been there minutes ago. It read, "The camera wasn't the only thing watching." And just like that, everything shifted again. The mystery wasn't just about what happened that night at the gas station anymore. It was about everything that came after. Every person who tried to help. Every clue that disappeared. Every truth that was buried just beneath the surface. And now, Samir wasn't just fighting to prove what he saw. He was fighting to survive it. For days, Samir lived in a haze of fear and confusion, unable to separate what was real from what was being fed to him. The hidden messages, the vanishing evidence, the eerie recordings, it all felt like an intricate trap with no way out. But then, in the middle of a sleepless night, a single, almost forgotten memory surfaced. He remembered that before the incident at the gas station, he had been working on something, a tech freelance gig for a private security contractor. It wasn't anything major, or so he thought. Just some minor back-end encryption cleanup for their internal servers. The company had paid well and seemed above board, but now it gnawed at him. He pulled up his old laptop from storage, hoping the drive still worked. He found the project files buried deep in his archives, but something strange stood out. A folder he didn't remember creating, marked with a single word, Echo. Inside were lines of code that weren't part of the job description. Surveillance software, facial recognition protocols, GPS triangulation logs. But the kicker? The last batch of recorded footage included timestamped surveillance images from before the gas station incident, tracking him for nearly 2 weeks. The footage showed Samir walking through public spaces, boarding trains, buying groceries, completely unaware he was already being followed. But the real shock hit when he paused a frame from a coffee shop camera. Sitting in the background, with sunglasses and a baseball cap pulled low, was Layla. Except, this footage was dated a full year before Samir had reconnected with her. She had been watching him. His fingers hovered over the keys, his breath caught in his chest. Was she part of this? Did she know something he didn't? Or had she been used just like him? That's when the email came through from an anonymous address with the subject line, "Still think you were just a witness?" The email had only a link. It led to a dark web stream, grainy footage, clearly from a hidden camera, showing a room filled with monitors. On one of them, Samir at the gas station. Another monitor, Malik walking out of the store after the confrontation. But what made Samir's blood run cold was the third screen. It showed Samir earlier that night, in the very same store, wearing the exact same clothes, standing behind the counter. Working. Like an employee. He stared at the screen, eyes wide. He had never worked there. He remembered walking in as a customer, just like always. But this footage showed him clearly operating the register, handing change to a customer, laughing with another employee in the back room. It made no sense until the next frame. A timestamp just 3 minutes before the viral video was recorded. It showed Malik entering through the back door. But instead of being aggressive or hostile, he was smiling. He shook Samir's hand, then walked calmly to the front of the store and waited, as if they were rehearsing something. It was all staged. The video that launched this chaos, the one the world saw and shared and judged, was never an accident. It was scripted, and Samir had been part of it. The room spun as he tried to process it. Could it be fake? Digitally altered? Deepfake footage? But the timestamps matched his GPS data, his phone history. Even the receipts in his wallet matched what he bought on break. Which left one terrifying possibility: Samir had been made to forget. Manipulated.
Drugged.
Or worse, willingly involved in something he no longer remembered. The realization shattered everything. Layla's fear. Malik's warning. The hidden footage. It wasn't just about what Samir saw that night. It was about what he had done. Or what someone made him believe he didn't do. Every instinct screamed that this wasn't just a smear campaign or a blackmail scheme. This was psychological warfare. Identity manipulation. A complete rewriting of personal truth. And the only people who could have pulled it off were the ones with access to the surveillance tools, the data archives, the mind control research, people from that security firm. The very ones Samir had unknowingly worked for. But before he could process it further, his phone buzzed. A FaceTime request from a contact listed simply as unknown. Against all reason, he answered. The screen was dark for a moment. Then slowly, the image cleared. It was Layla. But her face was bruised, her eyes red. She was somewhere cold, possibly underground, based on the echo in her voice and the unfinished cement walls behind her. "They're watching you," she said, barely above a whisper. "But it's not because of what you saw. It's because of what you were trained to forget." Samir opened his mouth to speak, but the screen cut to static before he could say a word. The call ended. Suddenly, everything clicked. This wasn't a conspiracy he stumbled into. It was one he may have been a part of. The question now wasn't who to trust. It was whether he could trust himself. And the most terrifying part? Somewhere, buried in the pieces of his memory, might be the real reason they were coming after him. The next morning came with an eerie stillness that felt almost rehearsed, as if the world itself was pausing to wait for Samir's next move. After what he'd seen on that dark web feed, the impossible footage of himself in a role he didn't remember playing, he wasn't sure what was real anymore. But he knew one thing for certain. If Layla had found a way to break through, even just for a few seconds, then she was still alive. Somewhere. And whoever was holding her had access to technology, resources, and psychological tactics well beyond anything he'd thought possible. But before he could even begin to form a plan, his world was shaken again, this time by someone he never expected to see on his doorstep. His cousin, Kareem. It was early, too early for visitors, and when Samir opened the door, Kareem looked different, nervous, disheveled, sweating despite the chill in the air. He didn't ask to come in. He just pushed past Samir without a word and began pacing the living room like a man being hunted. When Samir asked what was going on, Kareem finally turned and said something that made the floor feel like it dropped out from under him. "They contacted me too." At first, Samir didn't believe him. He thought maybe it was another trick, another piece of the mental trap being carefully constructed around him. But Kareem pulled out his phone and showed him the messages, encrypted strings of numbers, GPS coordinates, images of Samir in places he didn't remember being. The last message was a video clip of Kareem himself, recorded through a scope from a rooftop, clear as day, marked with crosshairs. "They said if I don't convince you to give up the footage," Kareem whispered, "they'll make it look like I disappeared the same way Layla did." Samir didn't even know how to respond. His instinct screamed to protect Kareem, to shield the last family member he trusted from this twisted mess, but a deeper fear was growing inside him, one that asked a far darker question. If Kareem was being threatened, how long had he been under pressure? How long had he been keeping secrets? And was his sudden appearance really a cry for help, or was it something else entirely? But before he could interrogate those doubts, Kareem laid the ultimatum on the table. "They gave me a deadline. Midnight tonight. Either you hand over everything you have, every file, every copy of that surveillance footage, every note you've written, or I don't come home. You choose." The words felt like a hammer cracking Samir's chest wide open. Every breath after that was harder to take. Give up the evidence, and maybe save Kareem's life, maybe even his own, but lose the only leverage he had, the only proof that any of this happened. Or hold on to it and risk everything. It wasn't just about him anymore. It hadn't been for days. Now there were people being pulled into the fire simply for knowing his name, and every second he waited to act felt like an invitation for someone else to vanish. But how could he decide when even his own memory was no longer trustworthy? He needed clarity. Answers. Anything to ground him before he made a move that couldn't be undone. He told Kareem to wait, that he needed time. But time wasn't something he had. That night, he drove across town to confront someone he hadn't seen since the night of the gas station incident. Maria, the store manager. She'd been the one who first noticed Samir acting strange, the one who filed the initial security report before the video even leaked. Maybe she knew more than she realized. Maybe she'd seen something in the footage that could verify whether Samir was just a pawn or part of something far darker. But when he arrived at her house, the driveway was empty and the front door ajar. He stepped inside, calling out, but there was no response. The house was trashed, papers scattered, drawers pulled open, pictures knocked off the walls. On the coffee table sat her phone, still unlocked, displaying the last message she received. It was a text from a blocked number. "You should have kept your eyes on the register." Samir backed out, pulse hammering, and that's when it hit him. Maria had also vanished. And now there was no doubt left in his mind. This wasn't about a misunderstanding. This wasn't about one viral video or a rogue customer. This was a coordinated operation, removing people one by one, isolating Samir with precision. They weren't just trying to silence him. They were erasing the truth, erasing the people who held it. As he drove back, his thoughts spiraled into places he didn't want them to go. What if Layla had known all along? What if Kareem was just buying time for the people chasing him? What if none of this started with the gas station at all, but with the encrypted project he'd worked on for that firm, the one he barely understood? Maybe this wasn't just about surveillance. Maybe it was about testing something. Psychological manipulation. Memory control. The perfect cover-up disguised as confusion. Maybe he had been the test subject. And just when he thought he'd reached the edge of what he could take, his dashboard screen lit up with an incoming call from an unknown number. He answered, and a heavily distorted voice filled the car. "You've seen what happens when people don't listen. This is your final chance. Upload the footage. Give us everything. Or the next video you see will be the last thing you ever forget." The call ended. The GPS rerouted itself, without prompt, to a new destination, coordinates that led deep into the outskirts of town, near an old quarry long since shut down. Samir stared at the screen, his throat dry, his heart pounding. He knew he shouldn't go. Knew it could be a trap. But he also knew this might be the only chance he had left to understand the truth, and face whatever part of it he'd buried so deep, even he no longer recognized it. Because the scariest part wasn't what they might do to him. It was what he might discover about himself when he got there. The road to the quarry twisted like a serpent through the pine-covered hills, the headlights slicing through the dense fog that seemed to creep in out of nowhere, swallowing the path behind him. Samir gripped the steering wheel with white-knuckled tension, every breath sharp with dread. He wasn't just walking into the dark anymore, he was diving headfirst into it, knowing full well there might be no way back. But something had shifted inside him. It wasn't fear driving him now. It was fury, a hunger to rip away every lie, expose every masked face, and find out who had decided to dismantle his life piece by piece. He wasn't just fighting for Layla anymore. He was fighting for everyone who'd been dragged into this twisted nightmare without ever understanding why. The quarry was silent when he arrived, an abandoned graveyard of rusting machinery and crumbling concrete. But the silence didn't last. The moment he stepped out of his car, floodlights snapped on, blinding him. A voice boomed from a speaker nearby, calm, almost clinical. "You made the right decision coming here, Samir. Now, let's see if you can handle the truth." He couldn't place the voice, but the way it said his name sent ice through his spine. A steel door creaked open at the base of a bunker carved into the stone wall. He walked in, heart thudding louder with every step. Inside, the air was sterile and humming with electricity. Screens lined the walls, all playing footage, gas stations, grocery stores, hospitals, apartment complexes. Every one of them was footage of ordinary people, but they were all tagged.
Timed.
Tracked. Labeled by behavior. Project Veritas, the voice continued, was never about you, Samir. You were just one of many. And then, as if a curtain were finally drawn back, he saw it, his own name, his face, his movements tracked across months. Then Kareem. Then Layla. Then Maria. Even coworkers, neighbors, casual acquaintances. Every one of them had been categorized, their reactions studied. Patterns analyzed. And there, beneath all the data, a logo he hadn't seen in years, Neurodyne Analytics. A defense contractor he'd once worked with during his freelance cybersecurity years. A project he barely remembered, buried under NDAs and blacked-out briefings. He'd walked away from it when it got too complicated. But apparently, they hadn't walked away from him. Before he could process it all, another door opened, and there stood Layla.
Alive. Pale.
Shaking. But alive. She looked at him with eyes that were haunted and apologetic at the same time. "I didn't think you'd come this far," she whispered. "I told them you wouldn't. I begged them to leave you out." She stepped closer, tears building in her eyes. "I was part of it, Samir. At the beginning. They paid me to monitor you, to see how much you'd notice. You were a control subject, the one who wasn't supposed to break the loop. But then you started remembering things you weren't supposed to, asking questions no one else ever did." Samir couldn't speak. He felt like his lungs had collapsed. "I tried to pull out, but by then it was too late. I disappeared because I tried to warn you." And then came the final blow. Kareem stepped out from the shadows, his eyes empty, his expression unreadable. "You weren't the only one they were watching," he said. "You were just the most dangerous." He pulled a tablet from his coat and tapped the screen. Every monitor shut off, replaced by a single image. Samir, back at the gas station. But this time, the footage was different. It showed him slipping something under the counter. A flash drive. Then looking directly into the security camera with a knowing smirk. "This footage never leaked, Samir," Kareem said coldly. "Because you buried it yourself. You erased your memory as part of a failsafe. But they recovered it. And now, they want to use you to sell the final phase of their tech." Samir staggered back, trying to breathe, trying to understand how this could be true. Had he really done this to himself? Had he once agreed to be part of a surveillance experiment so invasive, so morally bankrupt, that he chose to forget rather than live with it? Layla reached for him, but he stepped away, the world spinning around him. "Why now?" he asked. "Why tell me all of this now?" Kareem answered with a bitterness that burned. "Because they don't need you anymore. They've got everything they need. They just want you to hand-deliver it to the press, so it all looks like a whistleblower leak. It's cleaner that way. And if you don't, well, you've seen what happens." Samir's chest heaved as he realized the scale. This wasn't about blackmail, or revenge, or even personal gain.
It was about perception.
It was about crafting a public narrative so convincing that no one would question the story, even if it was built on a foundation of manipulation, betrayal, and psychological warfare.
They wanted a fall guy.
A hero who'd accidentally told too much truth. And he was their perfect candidate, because he'd once believed in the cause.
But now?
Now he had a choice. Run and let them win. Or turn the game on its head and burn the whole thing down from the inside. The air inside the old server chamber was electric, humming with the invisible pulse of thousands of lines of code, the heart of the surveillance operation Samir had unknowingly been part of for years. The smell of ozone mixed with dust and metal, the faint flicker of LED lights casting ghostly glows across racks of humming hardware. He stood at the center of it all, the final node in a network of deceit, and as he stared at the encrypted terminal glowing before him, the gravity of his next move weighed like a stone on his chest. Across from him, sitting calmly in a leather chair beneath a security camera that blinked like a patient witness, was Malcolm Ross, the true architect behind the entire program. Not a government official, not a tech guru hiding in a hoodie, but a former university researcher turned defense contractor, a man whose obsession with behavioral data had evolved into a multi-million-dollar black-budget nightmare. Samir's voice cracked the silence, edged with fury. Why me? Why not one of the millions of other people you could have used as a test subject? Malcolm smiled with a sort of smug pity, as though Samir were a student struggling to grasp a concept too complex for his own good. Because you were the variable we couldn't predict. You were intelligent, but forgettable. Detail-oriented, but socially isolated. The perfect candidate. You didn't just react to our tests, you adapted. You started finding patterns no one else saw. That was supposed to be impossible. He leaned forward, folding his hands like a chess master, making the final move. The truth is, Samir, we weren't watching you because we feared what you'd do. We were watching everyone else to see how they reacted to you. You were the trigger. Suddenly, the screens around the room came alive. Dozens of live feeds showing people Samir knew, worked with, spoke to in line at the bank, passed in the grocery store. And they were all being tracked in real time. Samir's head spun as he watched a feed from Layla's apartment, one from Kareem's job, another from Maria's front porch. His stomach turned when he saw the timestamp. These weren't old recordings. They were live. They had never stopped watching. This isn't just surveillance, Samir said, his voice hollow. This is control. You've turned human interaction into an algorithm. You're rewriting behavior itself. Malcolm tilted his head. And the beauty is, no one will believe it. Even if you leak everything in this room, they'll think you're just another whistleblower on a conspiracy bender. You've been branded unstable. That footage you planted? We've edited it. We've already distributed a version that shows you making threats. The world already believes what we've told them. Samir's hands trembled. His mind screamed at him to run, to fight, to destroy everything in front of him. But another part, the part they had counted on, remained clear, focused. This was no longer about exposing the truth. It was about weaponizing the only thing they couldn't manipulate, choice. He pulled a slim drive from his pocket, the original footage from the gas station, the unaltered version, the only uncorrupted copy of what really happened that night. Layla had risked everything to send it to him through a back channel only he would recognize. A QR code scrawled into the corner of an old paperback mystery they used to pass between them during long night shifts. A clue hidden in nostalgia, too analog to be traced. He held the drive over the console, and Malcolm's face changed. Not to fear, but irritation. You really think uploading that changes anything? The older man scoffed. The moment you plug it in, our system will isolate and absorb it. You'll be giving us exactly what we want. But Samir wasn't uploading it.
He was broadcasting it.
He'd found a vulnerability in the network's relay node, one that mirrored live console input directly into public cloud storage the moment a backup drive was detected. A safeguard designed to preserve classified data in case of an internal system failure. All he had to do was trigger the right kind of crash. He slammed the drive into the port and yanked out 3 data cables in rapid succession. The terminal blinked red. Alarms howled. Lights flickered and died. In less than 5 seconds, the data began syncing. pushed out to dozens of cloud accounts registered under burner aliases. The truth was out. Malcolm lunged at him in a moment of fury, grabbing for the drive. The two crashed into the floor, fists flying, rage unhinged. Samir felt his ribs crack, tasted blood, but he didn't stop. He jammed his knee into the older man's chest and pinned him down, eyes wild. "You watched me like I was a lab rat," he hissed. "But you forgot the one rule of running a maze. Sometimes the rat learns to bite." Security guards burst through the far door as the power fully shut down, flooding the chamber with emergency lights. But they didn't grab Samir. They grabbed Malcolm. Two of them nodded at Samir, ushering him back. Confused, Samir turned toward the wall of screens and found Layla standing behind the glass, a tablet in her hands, smiling through tears. "He built the system," she said over the intercom, "but I built the back door." And then the final twist. As Malcolm was hauled away, he shouted over his shoulder, "You think this ends here? You think this is the only facility?" Samir froze. Layla's face fell. Across the servers, the screens flickered one last time. New feeds appeared, dozens more. Faces they didn't recognize. Cities they'd never been to. Project Veritas wasn't contained, Malcolm sneered. It was replicated. The truth had gotten out, yes. But the war was far from over. For weeks after that night, Samir barely slept. Even though Malcolm had been taken into custody and the underground surveillance program exposed to the public, the aftermath rippled out like a shockwave no one could contain. News outlets flooded YouTube with clips dissecting the scandal. Live-stream debates popped up across Reddit, and a flood of trending hashtags like #HiddenSurveillance, #GasStationTruth, and #TheyWatchYou began dominating Twitter. But for Samir, the internet's outrage didn't feel like a victory. It felt like a ticking clock. Every time he passed a reflective surface, every time his phone battery drained faster than it should, every time he caught a stranger holding a camera just a moment too long, the anxiety returned like a pulse beneath his skin. He had won a battle, sure, but the war, as Malcolm had warned, was far from over. Still, there was no undoing what he'd done. The raw, unedited footage had reached the world. People saw the truth with their own eyes, how a quiet night shift clerk had been harassed, baited, and used as a pawn in a psychological test orchestrated by forces most Americans didn't even know existed. Layla, ever the coder and rebel, didn't disappear like most whistleblowers. She stepped into the spotlight, using her knowledge of the system's inner workings to testify before Congress and help build legal pressure against those involved. But even she knew the government would never admit the full extent of what had happened. Too many black-budget contracts. Too many shadow networks. Instead, they issued vague public statements about data misuse and rogue contractors, claiming the program was isolated and now fully dismantled. Samir knew better. He knew enough about systems to understand that once code is out in the world, it doesn't vanish. It mutates, gets copied, rebranded, reused. He hadn't stopped the machine. He'd only forced it to evolve. And so, he did the only thing he could. He walked away from his old life. He left his apartment, his job, even his phone behind. He moved states, started over under a new name, and finally started listening to the silence instead of fearing it. There was something healing in the stillness of not being watched, or at least in choosing to believe that he wasn't. He'd spend mornings walking trails no GPS could follow, nights reading books that never had a camera lens tucked between the pages. He reconnected with his father in Detroit, who still worked on vintage cars and didn't trust anything that required an internet connection. There was comfort in the analog. It wasn't about escaping, it was about reclaiming the simple human right to exist without being turned into data. And in a world obsessed with facial recognition, targeted ads, and behavioral tracking, that felt almost revolutionary. But even in his quietest moments, Samir couldn't forget the last thing Malcolm had said. "You think this is the only facility?" The phrase haunted him like a mantra, like a puzzle with no clean solution. Every so often, he'd spot a headline, "Unknown tech firm accused of data breach," or "Smart camera glitch exposes private footage," and wonder if it was all connected. Maybe it was paranoia, Or maybe it was the instinct that had always made him question patterns. Either way, he never stopped noticing the signs. A new gas station chain rolling out AI customer service. A city approving more facial recognition-enabled traffic lights. A viral video that felt too perfectly captured, too well edited to be real. The same script repeating itself in new clothes. Still, Samir found a strange kind of peace, not because everything had been fixed, but because he had chosen to live with his eyes open. He had stared into the heart of a machine designed to manipulate emotion, behavior, and truth itself, and he had pushed back, even when it nearly destroyed him. Not as a hero, not as a martyr, but as a man who refused to be rewritten. And in the end, maybe that was enough. Then, one rainy night, as he locked up the small hardware store where he now worked under the radar, a woman entered just before closing. Her coat was soaked, and she looked exhausted. She placed a small black device on the counter, something like a dash cam, older model, worn and dusty. "You fix these?" she asked softly.
Samir looked at the brand.
It was the same kind of dash cam that started everything. He swallowed, nodded slowly, and took it in his hands. "I can try," he said. As he opened the casing, the faintest whir of old storage tech hummed to life. The screen flickered. A distorted image began to play. Blurry figures, a gas station sign, a familiar logo in the corner. And just like that, the loop began again. Because the truth has a way of resurfacing. And some stories? They never really end. They just wait until someone is finally ready to see them.